The scent hit the hall like a wave of fire, and every wolf in the room went still. Lyra Hale felt it before she understood it. Her skin turned hot, then cold, then hot again. The small patch on her wrist, the one that held her suppressant, had come loose sometime during the crowd's pushing and shoving, and now it hung useless against her sleeve. She reached for it too late. The scent was already out, already moving through the grand hall of the Blackthorn pack, like smoke finding every corner of a room. She had not wanted to come tonight. She had told her cousin Ivy this 3 times on the walk over, and Ivy had ignored her 3 times, pulling her by the wrist through the crowded streets until they reached the pack hall, where lanterns glowed gold against the night, and hundreds of wolves gathered to watch history happen. Tonight the 3 sons of the Thorn line would stand before the pack and become its alphas. Not 1 alpha, 3. A thing that had never happened before in the long memory of the Blackthorn wolves. Lyra had planned to stand at the back, near the doors, where she could slip away the moment the ceremony grew too loud or too crowded. She was good at slipping away. She had been doing it her whole life. Ever since her family's name had fallen from grace 2 generations ago, the Hales had learned to stay small, stay quiet, stay unseen. Lyra had taken that lesson and made it her whole personality. She kept her head down. She wore plain clothes, she never spoke unless spoken to, and she wore the suppressant patch every single day, because an Omega who could not control her own scent was an Omega who invited trouble, and trouble was the last thing the Hale family could afford. But patches failed. Hers had failed tonight, in front of the entire pack, at the exact moment the 3 Thorn brothers stood at the center of the hall with their hands raised for the binding oath. The result was immediate and impossible to hide. Cale Thorn, the eldest by 4 minutes, was the first to turn his head. He had been mid-sentence, reciting the oath that generations of alphas before him had spoken, when his words simply stopped. His nostrils flared. His golden eyes, sharp and commanding even at rest, snapped toward the back of the hall with a speed that made the pack elders beside him flinch. Ronan Thorn turned next, a half-second behind his brother, his jaw tightening as if he had been struck. Where Cale's reaction was sharp and immediate, Ronan's was slower, heavier, like a man trying to hold back a door that refused to stay shut. Dax Thorn, the youngest, did not turn his head at all. He simply closed his eyes, breathed in once, and when he opened them again, something in his expression had changed completely. Softer, and somehow more dangerous for it. The elder conducting the ceremony faltered mid-word, looking between the 3 brothers with growing confusion. Whispers began at the edges of the crowd and spread inward like ripples on water. Nobody understood what was happening. Nobody except, perhaps, the pack's oldest historian, who stood near the front, with her hand pressed suddenly to her mouth. Lyra did not know any of this yet. She only knew that every wolf near her had gone quiet, and then, one by one, had turned to look toward her, and that the space around her had opened up as people stepped back, as if she had suddenly become something to be afraid of. "What is happening?" she whispered to Ivy, but Ivy was staring at her too, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "Your patch," Ivy said. "Lyra, your patch." Lyra looked down at her wrist and saw the small square of fabric hanging loose, no longer touching her skin. Panic rose fast and sharp in her chest. She pressed it back into place with shaking fingers, but it was far too late. The scent was already loose in the hall, and it was not fading. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger with every second, curling through the air like it had a will of its own, like it was reaching for something, or someone. 3 someones. At the front of the hall, Cale took 1 step forward, then stopped himself, gripping the podium in front of him, hard enough that the elder standing beside him glanced down at his whitened knuckles with alarm. Ronan's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Dax had not moved at all, but his eyes had not left the back of the hall since the moment the scent reached him, and there was a hunger in that stillness that unsettled everyone close enough to see it. The pack had never seen the 3 brothers react to anything the same way. They disagreed on nearly everything. Cale believed in strength and control. Ronan believed in caution and strategy. Dax believed in almost nothing, except his own instincts. They had spent their whole lives competing, pushing against each other in ways that made the older pack members worry about the future of a triple rule before it had even begun. But right now, in this moment, all 3 of them wanted exactly the same thing, and that thing was Lyra. "Something is wrong," Lyra said, backing toward the door. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure the whole hall could hear it. I need to leave. Lyra, wait, Ivy said. But Lyra was already moving, weaving through the crowd that parted for her without seeming to mean to. Wolves stepping aside, as if her passing scent pushed them back like a physical force. She reached the heavy wooden doors of the hall and pushed one open, stepping out into the cool night air, gasping, like she had been holding her breath the entire time. Outside, the moon hung low and full over the pack grounds, casting silver light across the stone paths and the old oak trees that marked the boundary of the ceremony square. For a moment, she thought she might actually get away. She might make it home, lock her door, and pretend none of this had happened. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Not one set, 3. She turned, and there they were, the Thorne brothers, standing just outside the hall doors, having crossed the entire length of that crowded room, faster than should have been possible. Cale stood slightly ahead of his brothers, his shoulders squared, his expression unreadable, except for the intensity burning behind his eyes. Ronan stood to his left, arms crossed, studying her the way a strategist studies a puzzle he does not yet understand but intends to solve. Dax stood to the right, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly, watching her with an expression that was almost gentle, almost curious, and somehow, that was more unnerving than anything. "You should not have run," Cale said. His voice was steady, low, carrying the natural weight of command that came from a lifetime of being listened to. "I did not mean to run," Lyra said, though that was not entirely true. I did not mean for any of this. My patch came loose. It was an accident." "An accident," Ronan repeated, as if testing the word, turning it over like something that did not quite fit. "Do you know what just happened in there?" Lyra shook her head slowly. She truly did not. Dax was the one who answered, his voice softer than his brother's, almost careful. "Our wolves recognized you, all 3 of us, at the same time." "That is not possible," Lyra said, though even as she said it, she could feel something strange humming beneath her own skin, something that had never stirred in her before, something that seemed to reach toward the 3 men standing in front of her, the way a plant reaches toward light. "It should not be possible," Cale agreed. "And yet here we are." Behind them, the doors to the hall opened again, and pack members began spilling out into the night, drawn by curiosity and the electric tension that had followed the brothers outside. Among them was Mira, the pack's historian, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, careful eyes. She pushed through the gathering crowd until she reached the small circle formed by Lyra and the 3 alphas, and she stopped a few steps away, staring at Lyra with an expression that mixed disbelief with something that looked almost like recognition. "It cannot be," Mira murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "After all this time." "Mira," Cale said, not taking his eyes off Lyra. "You know something." Mira did not answer immediately. She studied Lyra's face, then her eyes moved to the faint mark just behind Lyra's left ear, a small birthmark shaped almost like a crescent moon, one that Lyra had always assumed was nothing more than an ordinary blemish. "I need to check the old records," Mira said finally, her voice tight. "Tonight. Before anyone does anything they cannot take back." The crowd murmured louder now, voices rising with questions and speculation. Lyra felt the weight of every stare pressing against her skin, felt the strange hum inside her chest growing louder, felt the 3 brothers watching her like she was the only person left in the entire world. She had spent her whole life trying to disappear into the background of pack life, trying to be nothing more than a shadow nobody noticed. Now, in the space of a few impossible minutes, she had become the single most noticed person in the entire pack. And she had absolutely no idea what any of it meant, only that whatever was happening had already changed everything, and there would be no going back to the quiet, invisible life she had spent so long building for herself. She looked at Cale, then Ronan, then Dax, and each of them looked back at her with the same unshakable certainty. 3 sets of golden eyes fixed on her, as if she were the only fixed point in a world that had suddenly begun spinning out of control. "Someone please explain to me what is happening," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. Cale took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that the strange hum in her chest sharpened into something almost painful. "We do not fully know yet," he admitted, "but we intend to find out. And whatever the answer is, Lyra Hale, You are not walking away from this tonight. Behind him, Ronan and Dax moved closer too, forming a loose half-circle around her, not trapping her exactly, but making it very clear that none of them intended to let her disappear back into the crowd the way she had disappeared into pack life for years. The moon watched from above, full and silver and indifferent, while the wind carried her scent further out into the night, past the pack grounds, past the old oak trees, out toward the borders, where other eyes, unfriendly ones, caught the change in the air, and began to wonder what new opportunity had just opened up within the Blackthorn pack. Lyra did not know it yet, but the life she had spent so long trying to keep small and safe had just cracked open completely, and there would be no closing it again. Mira did not sleep that night. By the time the first light of dawn touched the windows of the pack archive, she had pulled every old ledger, every faded scroll, every record book that mentioned the founding families of the Blackthorn pack. Dust rose from pages that had not been opened in decades. Her fingers moved quickly, scanning names, dates, bloodlines, searching for the one connection she feared and hoped to find at the same time. Across the pack grounds, Lyra had not slept either. She sat in the small kitchen of the modest house she shared with her aunt, staring at a cup of tea that had long gone cold, replaying the events of the previous night, over and over in her mind. The hall, the scent breaking free. 3 sets of golden eyes turning toward her, like she was the center of the entire world. She still could not make sense of any of it. Her aunt, Celine, sat across from her, arms crossed, worry etched deep into the lines of her face. Celine had raised Lyra since she was small, after Lyra's parents had died in a border skirmish that the pack rarely spoke of anymore. Celine had always been protective, sometimes to the point of smothering, and last night had only made that protectiveness sharpen into something close to fear. "You cannot go back there," Celine said, "not for the first time. Whatever this is, it is not safe." "I do not have a choice," Lyra said quietly. "Mira asked me to come to the archive this morning. She said she found something. And if what she found is bad news for you?" Lyra did not have an answer for that. She only knew that the strange hum beneath her skin, the one that had started the moment her scent broke free, had not faded overnight. If anything, it had grown steadier, like a low note playing constantly beneath everything else, a note that seemed to point her, gently but insistently, toward the center of the pack grounds, toward the Thorn estate, toward the 3 brothers she had barely spoken 2 words to before last night. She left the house before her aunt could argue further, pulling her cloak tight around her shoulders as she walked through streets that felt different this morning. Wolves she passed slowed their steps to watch her go by. A few whispered behind their hands. One young mother pulled her child slightly closer as Lyra passed, not out of unkindness exactly, but out of the same uncertain caution people show toward something they do not understand. By the time she reached the archive building, a squat stone structure near the center of the pack grounds, she found Mira waiting outside the door, looking as though she had aged years overnight. "Thank you for coming," Mira said, ushering her quickly inside, before anyone else could see them together. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each one packed with old books and rolled parchment. The air smelled of dust and aged paper. Mira led her to a table where several open books lay spread out, their pages yellowed and brittle. "What did you find?" Lyra asked, though part of her was not sure she wanted to know. Mira took a slow breath. 200 years ago, before the current Thorn line, before the pack split the way it did, there was another founding family, the Hale family. Lyra blinked. "My family." "Your family," Mira confirmed. Back then, the Hales and the Thorns were not rivals. They were bonded, deeply bonded. Every generation, an Omega from the Hale line was fated to bind with the Alphas of the Thorn line. It was considered a great honor, a sign of balance between strength and grace, the pack used to call it. "Then what happened?" Lyra asked. "Why did my family fall so far?" Mira's expression darkened. There was a betrayal. A rival family, hungry for power, spread lies that the Hales had used dark methods to force the bond, that the connection was not natural, but manufactured through forbidden means. The accusation was false, but it did not matter. The pack believed it, or chose to, and the Hales were stripped of their standing almost overnight, punished for something they never did. Lyra sat very still, absorbing this, feeling something shift inside her chest, something that felt like anger and grief tangled together, for people she had never known but who shared her blood. And now, Mira continued, her voice quieter, it seems the old bond has found its way back. Except this time, it is not one alpha heir, it is three. Is that even possible? Lyra whispered. 3 brothers, bonding with the same omega? According to the oldest records, it happened once before, centuries earlier still, before even the original bonding line began. A triplet bond, split between 3 brothers and a single omega, was considered the rarest kind of fate a pack could witness. It was said to bring either great strength to a pack or great danger, depending on how the bond was honored. Lyra pressed her palms flat against the table, trying to steady herself. So people already benefited from tearing my family down once. What happens if they find out the bond has returned? Mira's eyes met hers, grave and serious. That is exactly what worries me. There are those in this pack who gained power and standing from the fall of the Hale name. If they learn the old bond has resurfaced, especially a bond as rare and significant as this one, they may see it as a threat rather than a blessing. You need to be very careful who you trust, Lyra. Before Lyra could respond, the heavy door of the archive creaked open, and both women turned sharply. Cale stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his expression unreadable, as his eyes moved from Mira to Lyra and back again. I was told I would find you here, he said, stepping inside, Ronan and Dax appearing behind him a moment later. Mira straightened, gathering the old books protectively against her chest. I was just explaining to Lyra what the records show. And what do they show? Ronan asked, his sharp eyes scanning the open pages on the table. Mira hesitated only a moment before repeating what she had told Lyra, watching the brothers' faces carefully as the truth settled over them. Cale's jaw tightened. Ronan's arms crossed, his expression thoughtful and calculating. Dax, surprisingly, was the one who looked the most affected, his eyes fixed on Lyra, with something that looked almost like sorrow. Your family was wronged, Dax said quietly. Wronged because of us. Because of our ancestors' failure to protect the truth. It was not your fault, Lyra said quickly, surprising herself with how easily the words came. You were not even born yet. No, Cale said, his voice low and firm. But it is our responsibility now. Whatever happened generations ago, we will not allow it to happen again. Lyra looked between the 3 of them, still trying to make sense of the sudden weight settling over her shoulders. Yesterday she had been nobody, a quiet omega hiding at the edges of pack life. Today she was apparently the center of an ancient bond that could reshape the pack's entire power structure, tangled in history she had never known existed, standing in a room with 3 alphas who all looked at her like she was something precious and important all at once. I do not know what any of you expect from me, she admitted. I do not even understand what this bond means, practically. What happens now? Ronan was the one who answered, his tone measured and careful. Pack law requires certain steps to be taken when a triplet bond is confirmed. There will need to be a formal recognition, eventually a binding ceremony. But none of that has to happen immediately. You have time to understand what this means before any decisions are made. And if I decide I do not want this? Lyra asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. The room went quiet. Cale's expression flickered with something unreadable. Dax's shoulders dropped slightly, as though the question had struck something tender. Ronan simply studied her, his calculating mind clearly already working through the implications. That is your right, Cale said finally, though the words seemed to cost him something to say. No one will force this bond upon you, Lyra, but I will tell you honestly, walking away from a bond this deep is not without consequence, for us, and, we believe, for you as well. Lyra thought of the low hum still humming beneath her skin, steady and warm, pointing toward these 3 men like a compass needle refusing to move. She thought of her family's name, buried under lies for 2 generations. She thought of the strange, dizzying pull she had felt the moment their eyes met hers across the crowded hall. She did not have an answer yet, but she knew, standing in that dusty archive with the weight of centuries pressing down around her, that her old life of quiet invisibility was already gone, whether she chose this bond or not. Outside the archive windows, the morning sun climbed higher over the pack grounds, and somewhere beyond the walls, word of what had happened in the ceremony hall was already spreading, carried from mouth to mouth, reaching ears that would not welcome the news kindly. News of what happened in the ceremony hall reached Voss Kane before the sun had fully risen. He heard it first from a servant girl who worked in the pack kitchens, then again from a border guard, then a third time from his own second-in-command. Each version slightly different, but the core of it always the same. An Omega named Lyra Hale had triggered a bond with all three Thorn heirs at once. Voss set down the cup of tea in his hand very carefully, as though the movement itself required great control, and stared out the window of his study toward the distant spire of the pack hall. He had spent 15 years building his position within the Blackthorn Council, 15 years of careful alliances, quiet favors, and patient maneuvering, all of it built on the foundation laid 2 generations ago, when the Hale family fell from grace, and the Kane family rose to fill the gap they left behind. Voss's own grandfather had been among those who spread the lies that destroyed the Hales, and the Kane family had profited from that betrayal ever since, climbing steadily into positions of influence that the old Hale line had once held. If the ancient bond between the Hale and Thorn lines had truly returned, and if it was recognized and honored by the pack, everything the Kane family had built could unravel. A united triplet alpha rule, strengthened rather than weakened by an old bond finally restored, would leave very little room for a beta commander who had built his power on the ashes of another family's ruin. Voss called for his second-in-command, a broad-shouldered wolf named Garrett, who had served him loyally for years. "Find out everything you can about this Hale girl," Voss said. "Her habits, her friends, anything that might be useful." "Useful for what?" Garrett asked. Voss's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "For making sure the pack sees this bond the way I need them to see it." Meanwhile, across the pack grounds, Lyra had returned home from the archive, with her mind spinning, only to find her small house surrounded by a crowd of curious onlookers, wolves who had never spared her a second glance before now gathered outside her door, whispering and craning their necks for a glimpse of the girl who had somehow captured the attention of all three alpha heirs at once. Celine met her at the door and pulled her quickly inside, bolting it shut behind them. "This has been happening all morning," Celine said, her voice tight with worry. "People keep coming by, asking questions, trying to get a look at you. I do not like it, Lyra. Any of it." Lyra sank into a chair at the kitchen table, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep, and everything to do with the sheer weight of everything she had learned that morning. She told her aunt what Mira had shared, about the old bond, about the Hale family's true history, about the betrayal that had cost them everything. Celine listened in silence, her expression growing more troubled with every word. When Lyra finished, her aunt was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her own hands. "I always wondered," Celine finally said. "Your mother used to talk about our family's past like there was more to it than anyone let on. She never told me the full story. Perhaps she did not know it herself, but she used to say we came from something greater than what we had become." "Do you think it is true?" Lyra asked. "The bond, I mean. Do you think it is real?" Celine reached across the table and took Lyra's hand, her grip warm and steady. "I think, whatever it has already changed your life, whether you wanted it to or not. The question now is not whether it is real. The question is what you intend to do about it." That evening, a messenger arrived at the small house, carrying a formal request from the Thorn estate, asking Lyra to join the three brothers for dinner the following night, an invitation phrased with careful respect, giving her every opportunity to decline if she wished. Lyra stared at the folded parchment for a long time before finally deciding, against every instinct that told her to remain hidden and small, that she would go. She told herself it was only to learn more, to understand what exactly this bond meant before deciding anything further. But some quieter part of her, the part still humming with that strange, steady pull, knew there was more to it than simple curiosity. The following evening, Lyra approached the Thorn estate with her heart hammering against her ribs. The building rose tall and elegant against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with warm light, guards stationed at the entrance who straightened immediately upon seeing her, opening the gates without a word of challenge. Inside, she found the three brothers waiting in a private dining room, and for the first time since the ceremony, she saw them not as a single overwhelming force, but as three very different men. Cale stood near the window, his posture rigid, his expression carefully controlled, though his eyes tracked her every movement the moment she entered the room. Ronan sat at the table already, a stack of papers pushed to one side, as though he had been working right up until she arrived, his sharp gaze assessing her with quiet calculation. Dax leaned against the wall near the fireplace, arms crossed loosely, the corner of his mouth lifting into something that was almost a smile when their eyes met. "You came," Dax said, pushing off the wall to approach her. "We were not certain you would." "I told myself I only came to ask questions," Lyra admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. "Then ask them," Cale said, finally moving from the window to join them at the table. "We owe you honesty, at the very least." Dinner unfolded slowly, and Lyra found herself asking question after question, about pack law, about the binding ceremony, about what exactly would be expected of her if she chose to accept the bond. The brothers answered carefully, each in their own way. Cale spoke with the certainty of someone used to making decisions and living with their consequences. Ronan spoke with careful precision, always considering angles and implications before committing to an answer. Dax spoke the most freely, often saying things his brothers seemed to wish he had kept to himself, revealing a warmth beneath his easy manner that Lyra had not expected. By the time the evening drew to a close, she understood a little more about the bond, though certainly not everything. She understood that pack law gave her time, that no decision needed to be rushed, that the brothers themselves seemed as uncertain about navigating this strange new dynamic between them as she was. What she had not expected was how much she found herself wanting to stay a little longer, to ask one more question, to watch the way the three of them shifted and adjusted around each other, competing quietly for her attention, even as they seemed to be learning, for the first time in their lives, how to share something, instead of fighting over it. As she finally rose to leave, escorted to the door by all three brothers at once, Cale spoke quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Whatever you decide, Lyra, know that none of us intend to let harm come to you, not from outside forces, and not from us." Lyra nodded, though she was not entirely sure she believed such a promise could be kept. As she walked home beneath a sky scattered with stars, she did not notice the figure watching from the shadows near the estate gates, cataloging her every movement, already planning how best to use the knowledge of tonight's dinner against her. Rumors traveled faster through the Blackthorn pack than any messenger could. By the end of the week, Lyra could not walk to the market without hearing whispers follow her down every street. Some of the stories were harmless, if exaggerated, tales of an Omega blessed by fate to bind three kings at once. Others were far less kind. She first heard the ugly version of the story from a woman selling bread near the town square, who did not realize Lyra was standing close enough to hear her talking to a friend. "They say she planned it," the woman said, wrapping a loaf in cloth. "Loosened her own patch on purpose, right in front of the brothers, knowing exactly what would happen." "I heard she comes from a line of manipulators," the friend replied, "that her family used to trick alphas into bonds generations ago." Lyra's stomach turned cold. She walked away quickly, before either woman noticed her, but the words followed her home, echoing in her mind, long after she had shut her own front door behind her. She recognized the shape of the lie immediately, the same shape Mira had described to her in the archive, the same accusation that had destroyed her family 2 generations earlier. Someone was deliberately spreading it again, twisting the truth into something ugly and calculated, and Lyra had a sinking feeling she knew exactly the kind of person who might benefit from doing so. She mentioned it to Mira the next time they met at the archive, and the older woman's face grew grim. "This has the mark of Voss Kane all over it," Mira said. "His family gained everything from the fall of the Hales. If the old bond is restored and recognized, his influence on the council would shrink considerably." "What can I do about it?" Lyra asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "I cannot exactly walk through the streets correcting every rumor I hear." "No," Mira agreed, "but the brothers can. A public defense from all three of them would carry more weight than anything else." Lyra was reluctant to ask this of them. She had already accepted their dinner invitation once, already allowed herself to be pulled deeper into their world than she had originally intended, and some stubborn part of her resisted the idea of leaning on them further. But the rumors continued to spread, growing uglier with each retelling, until finally an incident forced her hand. She was walking home from the market one afternoon, when a group of younger pack members, emboldened by the stories they had heard, blocked her path on a narrow street, taunting her with cruel imitations of the whispered accusations, calling her a schemer, a manipulator, questioning loudly whether she had truly earned the bond, or stolen it through trickery. Lyra tried to walk past them, keeping her eyes down, refusing to give them the reaction they were clearly hoping for. But one of them, a young man with a mocking sneer, stepped directly into her path, blocking her way entirely. "Come now," he said. "Show us this famous scent that caught 3 alphas at once. Or was that just another trick?" Before Lyra could respond, a low growl cut through the tension of the street, and the young man's confidence crumbled instantly. Ronan Thorne stood at the mouth of the alley, his expression cold and controlled, in a way that was somehow more frightening than open anger would have been. "I suggest you find somewhere else to be," Ronan said quietly. The group scattered almost instantly, several of them stumbling over each other in their haste to disappear down side streets. Ronan crossed the remaining distance to Lyra, his sharp eyes scanning her face for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," Lyra said, though her hands were trembling slightly. "Just embarrassed, mostly, and tired of hearing lies about my family, repeated as though they were fact." Ronan's jaw tightened. "This has gone further than I realized. Come with me. Kale and Dax need to hear about this as well." At the Thorne estate that evening, Lyra recounted the incident to all 3 brothers, watching their expressions shift from concern to controlled fury as she spoke. Kale paced the length of the room, his movements sharp and restless. Dax sat very still, his hands clenched on his knees, a muscle working in his jaw. Ronan stood near the window, arms crossed, already thinking through solutions the way he approached every problem. "This cannot continue," Kale said finally, stopping his pacing to face the others. "We need to address this publicly, and soon, before the lies take deeper root." "Agreed," Ronan said. "A public statement, made by all 3 of us together, confirming the bond and defending Lyra's family name." Dax looked up, his usual easy warmth replaced by something harder. "We should also find out who is spreading these rumors. This did not happen by accident." Lyra thought of Mira's suspicion about Voss Kane, but hesitated to voice it without proof. "I do not have evidence of who started it, only a guess." "Then we will find evidence," Kale said firmly. "No one attacks what belongs to us and walks away without consequence." The word belongs settled strangely in Lyra's chest, equal parts uncomfortable and, to her surprise, oddly comforting. She was not accustomed to being defended, to having anyone stand between her and the world's cruelty. Her whole life had been built around making herself small enough that no one would bother noticing her at all. Having 3 powerful alphas ready to go to war on her behalf was a feeling she did not yet know how to hold. "I do not want anyone hurt because of me," she said quietly. "You are not the cause of this," Dax said, moving to sit beside her, his voice gentle, in a way that eased some of the tension in her shoulders. "The cause is whoever decided that spreading lies about your family was an acceptable way to protect their own interests. That is on them, not you." Kale called for a public gathering to be held within the week, where all 3 brothers would formally address the pack, confirm the nature of the bond, and speak clearly about the truth of the Hale family's history. Word of the gathering spread quickly, and Lyra spent the following days in a state of nervous anticipation, torn between gratitude for the brothers' support and anxiety about standing before the entire pack once again, this time not by accident but by design. On the morning of the gathering, Celine helped her dress, smoothing the fabric of a simple but well-made gown, her hands steady despite the worry still lingering in her eyes. "You do not have to do this alone," Celine said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Lyra's ear. "Whatever happens today, you have people standing with you now." "That is more than either of us had before." Lyra nodded, drawing strength from her aunt's words as she prepared to face the pack, uncertain of what the day would bring, but determined, for the first time in her life, not to disappear quietly into the background while others decided her fate for her. The pack hall was full again by midday, the same hall where the ceremony had unraveled a week earlier, though this time the mood carried a different kind of tension, heavier with expectation than celebration. Lyra stood behind a side door with Celine, listening to the low roar of hundreds of gathered voices, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. On the other side of the door, Kale addressed the crowd first, his voice carrying easily across the packed hall, without need for amplification. 2 weeks ago, many of you witnessed something unprecedented, he began. A bond formed between myself, my brothers, and Lyra Hale. In the days since, rumors have spread, many of them false, some of them deliberately cruel, aimed at discrediting a woman who has done nothing except exist as fate intended her to. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cale continued, his tone hardening. I want to be clear. The Hale family was not disgraced 2 generations ago because of any wrongdoing on their part. They were the victims of a deliberate campaign of lies, spread by those who benefited from their downfall. We have the historical records to prove it, records our own historian has confirmed. Ronan stepped forward next, his measured voice cutting through any doubt with careful precision. We understand this is difficult for many of you to accept. Change often is. But the pack was built on truth and strength, not on convenient lies that serve a select few at the expense of the innocent. We will not allow that pattern to repeat itself. Then Dax spoke, his voice softer than his brother's but no less firm. Lyra Hale did nothing to seek this bond. She spent her entire life trying to remain unnoticed, trying to protect herself and her family from further harm. The fact that fate chose her, chose all 3 of us together, is not something to fear or resent. It is something this pack should be proud to witness. Behind the side door, Lyra closed her eyes, steadying her breathing as Cale's voice called her forward. Lyra Hale has agreed to stand before you today, to speak for herself, rather than allow others to speak falsely on her behalf. The door opened, and sunlight spilled across her, as she stepped into the hall, walking the same path she had once tried to escape down. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her, and though her instinct screamed at her to retreat, she forced herself forward, standing beside the 3 brothers at the front of the hall. For a long moment, she said nothing, simply looking out at the sea of faces before her. Then she found her voice, quieter than the brothers but steady. I never asked for any of this, she began. I spent my whole life trying to stay invisible, because I was taught, without anyone ever saying it directly, that being noticed was dangerous for someone with my family's name. I did not understand why until recently, when I learned the truth about what really happened to my family generations ago. She paused, gathering her courage before continuing. My family was not disgraced because they did something wrong. They were destroyed because someone else wanted what they had, and lying was easier than earning it honestly. I am not asking any of you to trust me blindly. I am only asking you to judge me by my actions, not by rumors spread by people who have never even spoken to me directly. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, some skeptical, some sympathetic. Near the back of the hall, Voss Kane stood among the council members, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes had narrowed slightly as Lyra spoke. An elder council member rose from the front row, his voice carrying clearly. If the bond is genuine, and the historical claims are accurate, then the Hale family deserves formal reinstatement of their standing within the pack. I move that the council review the matter immediately. Several other council members nodded in agreement, and for a moment, it seemed the tide of the gathering had turned decisively in Lyra's favor. Then Voss stepped forward, his voice smooth and reasonable, the perfect picture of measured concern. I do not doubt the historical records, he said. But I would urge caution before the pack rushes to embrace such a significant change. A triplet bond, if genuine, carries enormous implications for the balance of power within our pack. Surely it deserves careful, thorough investigation before any formal reinstatement occurs. His words were reasonable enough on the surface that several council members nodded thoughtfully, and Lyra felt her stomach sink as she recognized the strategy for what it was, a delay tactic disguised as caution, designed to stall the process long enough for doubt to take root again. Cale's eyes flicked toward Voss, sharp with suspicion, though his expression remained composed as he addressed the hall once more. We welcome any thorough investigation the council wishes to conduct. We have nothing to hide. The council agreed to review the matter formally over the following weeks, a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but gave the process a path forward. As the gathering dispersed, Lyra found herself surrounded by curious onlookers, some offering cautious words of support, others still eyeing her with open suspicion. Ivy found her way through the crowd, wrapping Lyra in a tight hug. You did well up there. Better than well. It does not feel like enough, Lyra admitted, watching Voss disappear into a cluster of council members near the far doors, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. Something about that man makes my skin crawl. Mira appeared at her side, having watched the entire exchange from the edge of the hall. Your instincts are good. Voss Kane did not become as influential as he is by playing fair. He will not give up his position without a fight, and he has had 2 generations to learn how to fight quietly, without ever appearing to be the one holding the knife. Kale, Ronan, and Dax joined them a moment later, the tension of the public address still visible in their shoulders. "That went better than expected," Ronan said, though his tone carried little relief. "But Voss's request for investigation buys him time he will use to build a stronger case against us, or against Lyra specifically." "Then we cannot waste the time either," Kale said. "We need to gather every piece of evidence we can find, both to confirm the bond formally and to expose whatever game Voss is playing before he has the chance to finish it." Lyra listened to the brothers discuss strategy, feeling, for the first time since the ceremony, less like a passive witness to her own fate, and more like an active participant in shaping what came next. Whatever Voss Kane was planning, she resolved silently. She would not simply wait to become his victim the way her family once had. That night, as she walked home beneath a sky heavy with clouds, she noticed a folded note tucked beneath her front door, unsigned, the handwriting hurried and uneven. It contained only a single line of warning, urging her to watch her back carefully in the days ahead, a warning that told her Voss's opposition ran deeper and more dangerous than even Mira had guessed. The unsigned note kept Lyra awake long into the night, its warning replaying in her mind until the words began to blur together. She showed it to Celine the next morning, watching her aunt's face grow pale as she read the hurried handwriting. "Someone is trying to help you," Celine said slowly, "or someone is trying to frighten you into doing something foolish. Either way, you need to be careful." Lyra brought the note to the Thorne estate that afternoon, and the 3 brothers examined it with grim expressions. Ronan turned it over carefully, studying the paper itself, the ink, the slight tremor in the handwriting. "Whoever wrote this was afraid," Ronan said. "Look at how the pen pressed unevenly into the paper. This was written quickly, likely without much light, possibly in secret. Someone inside Voss's circle, perhaps," Dax suggested. "Someone with a conscience, or someone hoping to protect themselves if things go badly." Kale's expression darkened. "Whoever it is, they are telling us Voss's plans go beyond simple political maneuvering. We need eyes inside his circle, someone who can tell us what he is actually planning before he acts on it." Over the following days, the brothers each took a different approach to protecting Lyra, revealing more of their individual characters in the process. Kale assigned guards to watch her home discreetly, insisting on precautions, even when Lyra protested that she did not want to feel like a prisoner in her own life. His concern manifested as control, a need to manage every variable he could influence, and though it occasionally frustrated her, Lyra began to recognize it as his particular way of caring, blunt and thorough rather than gentle. Ronan approached the problem differently, spending hours in the archive alongside Mira, cross-referencing old records, searching for any documentation that might expose Voss's family's role in the original betrayal against the Hales. He rarely spoke of his feelings directly, but Lyra noticed the careful way he always made sure she had a chair to sit in during their long research sessions, the way he remembered small details about her preferences, without being asked, quietly attentive, in ways that revealed more than his composed exterior suggested. Dax's approach was the most personal. He began finding reasons to spend time with her outside of formal meetings, walking with her through the pack grounds, asking about her life before the bond, listening genuinely as she described the years spent trying to remain unnoticed. He never pushed her to share more than she wanted. And slowly, cautiously, Lyra found herself opening up to him in ways she had not opened up to anyone in years. "Why do you think fate chose all 3 of you?" she asked him one afternoon, as they walked along a quiet path near the edge of the pack territory, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. Dax considered the question seriously before answering. "I used to think Kale, Ronan, and I were too different to ever truly rule together. We agreed on almost nothing. Maybe fate saw something we could not see in ourselves, that our differences were not weaknesses to overcome, but strengths that needed something, or someone, to hold them together." "And you think that someone is me?" "I think," Dax said carefully, "that since the night of the ceremony, I have watched my brothers argue less and listen more. I have watched them consider perspectives they would have dismissed outright before. Whatever the reason, something has shifted between the 3 of us, and it started the moment you walked into that hall." Lyra did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing, but she carried his words with her long after their walk ended, turning them over in her mind like a puzzle she was slowly beginning to understand. Meanwhile, Voss Kane was not idle. Behind closed doors, he met regularly with a small circle of council members and pack elders sympathetic to his cause, carefully cultivating doubt about the bond's legitimacy, framing every piece of good news about Lyra as further evidence of manipulation rather than genuine fate. The council review will take weeks, Garrett reported to him one evening, seated across from Voss in his private study. Perhaps we can use that time to our advantage. We already are, Voss said, swirling the wine in his glass thoughtfully. The rumors have done their work in shaping public perception, but rumors alone will not be enough to stop a bond this powerful. Once the council formally investigates it, we need something more concrete. Such as? Voss's eyes glinted with calculation. Something that makes the bond itself appear dangerous, not just to public opinion, but to pack stability directly. If the council believes recognizing this bond threatens the pack's safety, they will have no choice but to reject it, regardless of how genuine it may be. Garrett leaned forward, intrigued. What did you have in mind? Voss did not answer directly, only smiled faintly, and changed the subject, leaving Garrett with the distinct impression that his superior had already set something dangerous into motion, something he had not yet chosen to share, even with his most trusted lieutenant. Days later, tension within the pack grew sharper when word spread of unusual activity near the northern border. Unfamiliar scent markers discovered by patrol guards, signs suggesting outsiders had been scouting the edges of Blackthorn territory. The pack council convened an emergency session, and though no one connected the border activity directly to the ongoing dispute over Lyra's bond, an uneasy feeling settled over the pack grounds, a sense that something larger and more dangerous was beginning to stir beneath the surface of ordinary pack life. Lyra felt it too, that low current of unease running beneath every conversation, every glance exchanged between council members, every careful word chosen in her presence. Whatever Voss was planning, she understood now. It was not going to remain confined to whispered rumors and political maneuvering for much longer. Something was coming, and she had a growing suspicion that when it arrived, it would test not only her own resolve but the fragile, still-forming bond between herself and the three brothers who had upended her entire world in the space of a single night. The attack came on a night thick with fog, when visibility along the northern border dropped to almost nothing, and the moon hung hidden behind heavy clouds. Lyra had gone to the Thorn estate that evening, for what was meant to be a quiet dinner, a rare moment of calm amid weeks of tension, when a border guard burst into the dining hall, breathless and alarmed. Unknown wolves crossing the northern boundary, the guard reported. At least a dozen, maybe more. They are moving fast, toward the eastern settlements. Cale rose immediately, his easy dinner conversation replaced instantly by sharp, commanding focus. Numbers, direction. How much time do we have? Perhaps 20 minutes before they reach the outer farms, the guard said. Ronan was already moving toward the door, barking orders to nearby staff to summon the pack's defense units. Dax hesitated only long enough to look at Lyra, his expression torn between duty and concern. Stay here, he said. Guards will remain with you. We need to go. I am not staying behind while the pack is in danger, Lyra said, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. If people are hurt, I want to help however I can. Lyra, this is not the time to argue, Cale said, already halfway to the door. I am not arguing. I am telling you I refuse to sit here doing nothing, while others risk everything. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down despite the fear tightening in her chest. Something in her tone made Cale pause, just for a moment, before he gave a short, reluctant nod. Stay close to Dax. Do exactly as he says. The eastern settlements, when they arrived, were already in chaos. Unfamiliar wolves moved through the narrow streets between houses, their intentions unclear but clearly hostile, sending panicked pack members fleeing toward the center of the settlement. Cale and Ronan moved immediately to organize the defense, rallying pack warriors to form a protective line, while Dax stayed close to Lyra, guiding her toward a safer position near the settlement's central well, away from the worst of the confrontation. Lyra's heart pounded as she watched the brothers work, Cale's commands sharp and decisive, Ronan calmly redirecting the chaotic scramble of frightened wolves into something resembling order, their earlier rivalry nowhere in evidence now, replaced by seamless, practiced cooperation that suggested years of unspoken understanding between them. buried beneath their competitive exterior all along. A commotion near one of the outer houses drew her attention, and through the fog, she spotted an elderly woman trapped near a collapsed fence, unable to move quickly enough to escape an approaching intruder. Without thinking, Lyra broke away from Dax's side and ran toward her. "Lyra, wait," Dax shouted, but she was already moving, adrenaline overriding caution. She reached the elderly woman just as the intruder closed the distance, and for a terrifying moment, Lyra found herself standing directly between the stranger and his intended target, her heart hammering, every instinct screaming at her to run. Instead, she stood her ground, some deep, ancient part of her wolf rising to the surface in a way she had never experienced before, a low growl building in her throat despite her fear. The intruder hesitated, momentarily startled by her defiance, and that hesitation was all Dax needed to close the distance, placing himself firmly between Lyra and the threat, his expression fierce and protective in a way she had not seen from him before. "Get behind me," he said, and this time she obeyed instantly, helping the elderly woman to safety, while Dax dealt with the intruder, his movements swift and controlled, ending the confrontation quickly, without unnecessary harm. Across the settlement, Kale and Ronan continued pushing back the remaining intruders, and within another quarter hour, the unfamiliar wolves began retreating, apparently having achieved whatever limited goal they had come for, disappearing back into the fog toward the northern border as quickly as they had arrived. In the aftermath, as pack warriors moved through the settlement checking for injuries and securing the area, Kale approached Lyra, his expression a complex mixture of relief and lingering alarm. "You could have been seriously hurt," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he seemed to be struggling to control. "But I was not," Lyra said, "and that woman is safe because someone was there to help her." Kale studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, respect mingling with the protective instinct that clearly still simmered close to the surface. "You have more courage than sense sometimes." "I have been told that before," Lyra said, managing a tired smile, despite the exhaustion beginning to settle over her. Ronan joined them, his sharp eyes scanning the retreating fog line with obvious suspicion. This was not a random raid. Those wolves moved with purpose, targeting the eastern settlements specifically, close enough to draw us out here while leaving other areas less protected. "You think it was deliberate," Lyra said, "meant to test our response, or distract us from something else?" "I think," Ronan said grimly, "that we need to consider who might benefit from creating chaos and instability within the pack right now, during the exact period when the council is reviewing your family's case." The implication hung heavy in the fog-laden air. Dax, still standing close beside Lyra, voiced what none of them wanted to say aloud. "Voss, we have no proof," Kale said, though his tone carried little conviction behind the caution. "Not yet," Ronan agreed, "but I intend to find some." As the pack began the slow process of recovering from the attack, tending to minor injuries and repairing damaged property, Lyra found herself standing quietly beside the three brothers, watching the community they were meant to protect pull itself back together with resilience and quiet determination. Whatever doubts still lingered among some pack members about the legitimacy of her bond, tonight had shown something undeniable, that when danger threatened, the three brothers moved, not as rivals competing for dominance, but as a single unified force, and that unity, however new and fragile, had likely saved lives. Later, walking back toward the estate in the thinning fog, Kale spoke quietly, mostly to himself. "We fought together tonight, better than we ever have before. Maybe that is what this bond is meant to do," Lyra said softly. "Not just connect me to each of you, but help the three of you finally learn to move as one." None of the brothers answered immediately, but the thoughtful silence that followed suggested her words had struck something true, a possibility none of them had fully considered until this dangerous, fog-covered night forced it into the open. The council announced its decision to accelerate the formal review following the border attack, citing the pack's need for stability and clear leadership during uncertain times. A binding ceremony, if the council approved the bond as legitimate, would need to take place before the next full moon, a deadline that suddenly felt impossibly close. 2 weeks, Ronan said, spreading a calendar across the table in the estate's private study. The three brothers and Lyra gathered around it along with Mira, who had become an almost constant presence in their planning sessions. "The council will vote after that," And if we do not have overwhelming evidence supporting the bond's legitimacy and the truth about your family's history, Voss will have every opportunity to sway the vote against us. He has already been working against us for weeks, Lyra said. What makes you think 2 weeks changes that? Because until now, his efforts have been quiet, Mira said. Rumors, whispers, subtle political pressure. A formal deadline forces everything into the open. He will need to act more directly if he wants to stop this, and direct action leaves evidence. Kale's jaw tightened, which means we should expect him to escalate. The following days passed in a blur of preparation. Mira worked tirelessly compiling every piece of historical evidence she could find, cross-referencing old council records with the ledgers that documented the original bond between the Hale and Thorn lines centuries earlier. Ronan focused on tracing the source of the border attack, quietly questioning pack scouts and border guards, piecing together a timeline that increasingly suggested the intrusion had been deliberately coordinated, rather than a random raid. Kale took on the difficult task of gathering support among the Pack Council, meeting individually with members whose votes remained uncertain, patiently explaining the historical evidence, and answering their questions with a directness that won over more allies than any of them had expected. Dax, meanwhile, spent his time with Lyra, helping her prepare for the formal ceremony itself, walking her through the ancient rites that a triplet binding would require, rites so rarely performed that even Mira had needed to consult the oldest texts in the archive to understand them fully. The binding rite requires each of us to make a vow individually, Dax explained one evening as they sat together in the estate's quiet garden, autumn stars beginning to emerge overhead. Not a shared vow between the four of us, but 3 separate promises, each one specific to the bond between that alpha and you. What kind of promises? Lyra asked. Whatever feels true, Dax said. The old texts say the words matter less than the honesty behind them. The bond recognizes sincerity, not perfect phrasing. Lyra considered this, watching the stars slowly brighten overhead. Are you nervous? Dax smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that had become more frequent between them over the past weeks. Terrified, honestly, not of the bond itself, of getting it wrong somehow, of not being what you need me to be. His honesty caught her off guard, and she found herself reaching for his hand without entirely deciding to do so, their fingers intertwining naturally in the cool evening air. I think, she said slowly, that none of us really know what we are doing. We are all just trying to figure this out together. Together, Dax repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Ronan's arrival, his expression grim enough that both of them straightened immediately, sensing bad news. I found something, he said, holding out a folded piece of parchment. One of the border guards recognized a scent marker from the attack. It matches a mercenary group known to operate along the southern territories, wolves who take contracts for coin, rather than loyalty to any particular pack. Someone hired them, Lyra said slowly. Someone with resources and connections outside our territory, Ronan confirmed. I have not yet found direct proof it was Voss, but the timing is too convenient to ignore. Kale joined them a moment later, having heard the tail end of the conversation. If we can prove Voss hired mercenaries to attack our own settlements, purely to create chaos and delay the council's decision, it would not just secure the bond's recognition. It would end his political career entirely. Assuming we can find proof before the council votes, Ronan said, which gives us less than 2 weeks to accomplish what we have not managed in the weeks since the initial ceremony. The pressure of the approaching deadline weighed heavily over the following days, each brother pursuing his own thread of investigation and preparation, while Lyra found herself increasingly drawn into the rhythm of their combined efforts, no longer merely a passive figure at the center of the bond, but an active participant working alongside them. One evening, as she reviewed old records in the archive with Mira, a familiar face appeared unexpectedly in the doorway. Ivy, breathless and anxious, hurried inside. Lyra, you need to hear this, Ivy said. My friend works in the kitchens at the council hall. She overheard Voss talking with someone tonight, someone she did not recognize. They mentioned the binding ceremony, and something about making sure it never happens. Lyra's blood ran cold. Did she hear anything more specific? Ivy shook her head. Only that they were planning something for the night of the ceremony itself. She was too frightened to listen longer without being noticed. Mira looked up sharply from the ledger in front of her. If Voss intends to disrupt the ceremony directly, we need to warn the brothers immediately. Whatever proof we still lack, we cannot afford to be unprepared when the night arrives. Lyra rose quickly, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. 2 generations ago, her family had been destroyed by lies and betrayal, without ever knowing the danger was coming, until it was far too late. She was not going to let history repeat itself, not while she still had the chance to fight back. The warning reached the Thorne estate within the hour, and the mood in the study shifted immediately, from cautious preparation to focused urgency. Cale listened to Ivy's account without interrupting, his expression growing harder with every word. "We need to increase security around the ceremony site," he said once she finished, discreetly, "so we do not tip Voss off that we know something is planned." "Discreet will only get us so far," Ronan said, already pacing the length of the room, his mind clearly working through possibilities. "If Voss intends to disrupt the ceremony directly, he will have prepared for the possibility that we increase our defenses. We need to think like him. What would actually stop a binding ceremony from being completed?" "Violence," Dax said grimly, "or something that makes the ceremony appear illegitimate in front of the entire pack, discrediting it publicly, rather than simply preventing it by force." Mira, who had accompanied Lyra to the estate, spoke up from where she sat near the window. "There is a third possibility. The old texts mention that a binding rite can be voided if it is interrupted at a critical moment, before the vows are completed. If Voss orchestrates a disruption timed precisely to that moment, he would not need violence at all. He would only need chaos." The room fell silent as the brothers absorbed this possibility. Cale was the first to speak. "Then we prepare for all 3. Increased security, contingencies for public disruption, and a plan to complete the vows quickly enough that no interruption has time to take hold." Over the following days, the brothers worked closely with pack warriors to establish a security perimeter around the ceremony grounds without drawing obvious attention, while Ronan continued digging for concrete evidence, linking Voss to both the border attack and whatever he was planning for the ceremony itself. Lyra spent hours with Mira, reviewing the exact wording and structure of the ancient rite, determined to memorize every step so thoroughly that nothing could catch her off guard. 3 days before the ceremony, Ronan finally uncovered the proof they needed. A stable hand who worked near the southern border came forward, having recognized one of the mercenaries from the earlier attack passing through again, this time meeting privately with a man the stable hand identified, after careful questioning, as Garrett, Voss's own second-in-command. "It is enough to bring before the council," Ronan said, laying out the stable hand's signed statement alongside the earlier evidence of the mercenary group's involvement. Not definitive proof that Voss personally ordered the attack, but enough to raise serious questions. "Questions will not be enough if he acts tonight, on the ceremony itself, before we have the chance to present this evidence formally," Cale said. They decided, after much discussion, to present the evidence to a small, trusted group of council members immediately, hoping to build enough support to counter whatever move Voss intended to make. But when the night of the ceremony finally arrived, tension hung thick over the pack grounds despite their preparations, an unmistakable sense that whatever was coming had not yet fully revealed itself. The ceremony began beneath a clear sky, the full moon rising bright and silver above the gathered pack, hundreds of wolves assembling in respectful silence, as Lyra took her place at the center of the ceremonial circle, flanked by Cale, Ronan, and Dax. Mira stood nearby, ready to guide the ancient rite, her expression tight with barely concealed anxiety. The first vow began smoothly. Cale spoke his words clearly, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, promising strength and protection, promising to honor the bond with unwavering loyalty. Lyra felt the warmth of his vow settle into her chest, the strange hum beneath her skin, brightening in response. Ronan spoke next, his careful, measured words promising wisdom and steady partnership, a vow to always consider her voice in decisions that shape their shared future. Again, Lyra felt the response deep within her, the bond strengthening with each sincere promise. As Dax stepped forward to speak his own vow, a commotion erupted at the edge of the ceremonial circle. Shouts rang out, and a group of wolves Lyra did not recognize surged forward, pushing through the startled crowd, their intent clearly to disrupt the proceedings before the final vow could be completed. Chaos broke out instantly. Pack warriors moved to intercept the intruders, but the sheer suddenness of the attack sent panic rippling through the gathered crowd, exactly as Voss had likely intended. "Complete the vow," Mira shouted over the noise, her voice sharp with urgency. "Now, before the moment passes." Dax's eyes met Lyra's amid the surrounding chaos, and despite the danger closing in around them, his voice remained steady as he spoke his vow, promising devotion and unwavering presence, promising to stand beside her through every difficulty that might come. Lyra felt the final piece of the bond click into place, a warmth spreading through her entire body, as the ancient rite completed itself despite the disruption unfolding around them. At that exact moment, Kale and Ronan moved to intercept the intruders directly, their combined strength quickly overwhelming the chaos, driving back the disruptors with an efficiency that spoke to how thoroughly they had prepared for exactly this possibility. Within minutes, the intruders were subdued, several of them captured and restrained by pack warriors, their identities quickly confirmed as the same mercenary group responsible for the earlier border attack. Near the edge of the crowd, Voss Kane stood frozen, his carefully composed expression cracking, as council members turned toward him, the evidence Ronan had gathered now impossible to ignore, given the mercenaries' presence at the ceremony itself. "Explain this," an elder council member demanded, striding toward Voss with fury written across his face. "Explain why mercenaries connected to your own second-in-command have attacked this ceremony twice now." Voss opened his mouth, searching for some explanation that might salvage the situation, but the damage was already done, the truth laid bare in front of the entire pack, in a way that no amount of careful political maneuvering could undo. Lyra stood at the center of the circle, the bond fully formed, and humming warmly within her, watching as 2 generations of injustice finally began, however imperfectly, to unravel in front of her eyes. The days following the disrupted ceremony brought a whirlwind of consequences that swept through the Blackthorn pack like a long overdue storm finally breaking. Garrett, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of standing trial alone, confessed everything to the council, revealing the full extent of Voss's scheme, from the original border attack designed to create instability, to the mercenaries hired specifically to disrupt the binding ceremony at its most critical moment. Voss himself was brought before the full council within days, stripped of his position, and formally exiled from Blackthorn territory, his family's carefully built influence collapsing as quickly as it had once risen from the ashes of the Hale family's ruin. Several council members who had quietly supported his efforts, whether from genuine belief or simple political convenience, found their own positions questioned in the aftermath, the pack undergoing a period of careful reckoning with how deeply Voss's influence had spread over the years. For Lyra, the immediate aftermath felt strange and disorienting. The rumors that had followed her for weeks evaporated almost overnight, replaced by a wave of public support that felt, in its own way, just as overwhelming as the suspicion had been. Pack members who had once whispered cruel accusations now approached her with genuine warmth, some even offering quiet apologies for having believed the lies so readily. "It will take time before it all feels normal," Mira told her one afternoon, the 2 of them sharing tea in the archive that had become something of a second home to Lyra over the past weeks. "Trust rebuilds slowly, even when the truth is finally out in the open, but you have already done something your family was never given the chance to do. You stood in the light and let the truth speak for itself." The formal binding rite, interrupted but not undone by Voss's final desperate attempt at sabotage, was completed properly 3 days later, in a smaller, quieter ceremony, attended only by close family and the pack's council. This time, no chaos interrupted the proceedings. Lyra stood beneath the same full moon, though it had begun to wane slightly, flanked once more by Kale, Ronan, and Dax, each of them repeating their vows with the same sincerity as before, this time completing the ancient rite in full. As the final words were spoken, Lyra felt something shift deep within her, the strange hum that had lived beneath her skin since the night of the original ceremony settling into something steadier, warmer, a sense of belonging she had never allowed herself to imagine possible. The bond, fully formed at last, connected her not to one alpha, but to 3 distinct, deeply different men, who had somehow, against every expectation, learned to move together as one. In the weeks that followed, the pack settled into a new rhythm under its restored triple leadership. Kale brought his natural authority to matters requiring decisive action, his early rigidity softened noticeably by Lyra's steady presence beside him. Ronan continued his careful, strategic approach to governance, though those who worked closely with him noticed he smiled more often now, especially when Lyra challenged his more cautious instincts with her own quiet wisdom. Dax remained the emotional heart of the three, his warmth and openness helping heal the lingering wounds within the pack community, drawing people together in ways his brother's more formal approaches never could alone. Lyra herself found her place gradually, not as a passive figurehead attached to three powerful alphas, but as an active voice within pack governance, her own family's painful history giving her a unique perspective on the importance of fairness and careful attention to those the pack's power structure too easily overlooked. She established, with the council's support, a new system for reviewing historical grievances, ensuring that no family would ever again suffer the kind of prolonged, unjust exile her own had endured. Her Aunt Celine, who had once feared this bond would only bring her niece further harm, watched with quiet pride as Lyra grew into her new role, the frightened, invisible girl who had once hidden behind suppressant patches and downcast eyes, transforming into someone the entire pack had come to respect and admire. On a clear evening, several months after the completed binding, Lyra stood on a balcony, overlooking the pack grounds, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold across the distant hills. Kale joined her first, resting his hand gently over hers on the balcony railing. Ronan followed shortly after, standing close enough that his shoulder brushed against hers, a small gesture of comfort that had become familiar and welcome over the months. Dax arrived last, wrapping an arm loosely around her waist, resting his chin lightly against the top of her head. "Do you ever think about how different everything would be if your patch had not failed that night?" Dax asked quietly. Lyra considered the question, watching the last light of the sun disappear behind the hills. "I used to spend so much energy trying to stay invisible, trying to make sure nothing about me ever stood out. I thought that was the only way to stay safe." "And now?" Kale asked. "Now I understand that hiding never actually kept me safe," she said. "It only kept me alone. Whatever fate decided that night, I am grateful it finally gave me the courage to stop hiding." The three brothers exchanged a glance over her head, a silent understanding passing between them, the same understanding that had grown steadily since the night their wolves had first recognized her scent across a crowded ceremony hall. Whatever challenges still lay ahead for the Blackthorn pack, whatever difficulties came with leading a community forward after so many years of quiet injustice, they would face them now, as they had faced the mercenaries and the chaos of that final disrupted ceremony, not as three separate alphas competing for dominance, but as one unified force, bound together by fate, and finally, fully, by choice. Below them, the pack grounds settled into the peaceful quiet of evening, lanterns beginning to glow warmly throughout the settlement, a community slowly healing from old wounds, and stepping forward into a future none of them could have predicted, but one that felt, for the first time in generations, solidly and rightfully theirs.